Hey class, so my ending thoughts video, I have some notes in front of me on my computer screen, so if you see me look at that, that's what I'm looking at. But the quote that I chose as one that stood out this week is from the Lake chapter, and it's on page 93, and it says, "The law of higher education is constantly torn between holding students responsible for their decisions and creating space for them to grow, and applying ordinary principles of business accountability." And I thought that kind of encapsulated like what we've been talking about for the majority of the semester. It kind of highlights the struggle of higher ed to create this environment that allows for student growth and ensures their safety, and it follows the laws and it follows the policies and the various aspects that it has to do so. I think it illustrates that there's a different space in higher education that higher education occupies, especially when it comes to law and policy. And we discussed that a lot at the beginning of the course, I think, particularly even when we talked about like historically what would occur in court cases and things like that, where institutions were looked at very differently because they provided that kind of a space. I think that this idea of applying ordinary business principles of accountability is kind of creeping into higher ed, and that it's seen, and we talked about this a little bit, as more of a transaction and transactional rather than an opportunity for growth for students. So I think that kind of we can see that shift happening a little bit, and we kind of covered some of that in class this semester. So kind of to just address the questions, in what way I grew as a scholar or practitioner, I feel like I've definitely gained a better understanding of like the implications of decision making in higher ed, right? So I've widened my lens to consider how the institution would look at a situation rather than just like the individual, and kind of understanding that difference. And so I'm definitely not perfect at that, but I do think that this class has helped me widen that lens a little bit. My main takeaway from the course, I think, is the quote Dr. McClure says, "It depends." So, that just the fact that like there's law and policy that we have to follow, but sometimes they're written so ambiguously that it's almost seeming like it's on purpose that it's ambiguous so that things can be kind of open to interpretation. So that idea of "it depends," I think, is what really has like stood out to me in the class. And one thing that kind of reminds me of that is when we talked about like the ADA situation with the college, where they had all of the information on the internet, and they had to take everything down because it wasn't meeting ADA accommodations, and so either they could not or they would not do the work to make it ADA applicable. And it kind of that shows like the shift of like how institutions have to be able to be flexible, and that policies and laws are going to change over time, and so that's going to kind of cause disruption sometimes at the institution to meet those changes. And we highlighted that a little bit too when we talked about our Title IX presentation and how administration can change the policies, and then you have to kind of as an institution just meet those needs, meet that change. In areas that I'd still like to learn, I really do feel like we have a good foundational understanding of some of the most like impactful law and policy in higher ed, but obviously it's impossible to go in depth on everything. I had to miss the tenure class, a big portion of that, which I'm very interested in. I did get to look at the PowerPoint and had a better understanding of it, and kind of understand the correlation of that and academic freedom, but I still kind of would have loved to be a part of that debate and try to kind of get a better understanding of how tenure could be maybe applied without the negative impacts that sometimes it has on students. So I think that area I'll have to do a little bit more digging to better understand that process. But overall, I mean, I feel like we covered a lot of information, and I definitely have a better understanding of the implications of policies and laws that higher ed has to follow. And I really enjoyed working in the groups and watching everyone's group presentations. So I think that we had a really great semester.